Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to go over about an hour of res server essential training, really, for recovery and essential things that everybody needs to know to keep the system. If you see something that's about to die or something that's not right, or you're recovering a site, things like that, things to look out for, and all that stuff. So I'm going to connect into a couple of sites just to show some things and some situations you may run into. So hang on just a second. Let me connect. Get my screen shared here. Okay. Okay, I'm connected into a site. And this, let me move. I've got two sites connected here. Let me bring this one over. All right. Is this size okay? Is it too small?
It's a little,
It's a little small in the layout.
yeah.
All right, let me make a quick adjustment here. How about now? Very good.
Yeah, that's better.
All right. Okay. So really the things that to look out for, things just the essential stuff that I would, if you're checking out a site, basically look for running out of hard drive space. That's a issue at times, especially on drive C. That's where we commonly have the issue. Things tend to build and get too large. The other thing is about sometimes we got to repartition to fix that, making sure that backups are there. Main thing is we got database backups. Where to look for that. If you see a .bad database, and we got to look into what's going on there. That could be a result of a bad hard drive, or there's, you could have, even with a RAID, you have a drive that's dying. That's happened recently at a site, and it doesn't always show itself. It can show it in, I think, Computer Administrator, you can see that in Event Viewer sometimes, but it's rare. A lot of times the RAID 1 masks over that, so you can't rely on that. But I do always look in Event Viewer for things that look off, especially if you get some odd situations. So just to look through what I would always check, I've got an external drive connected here, so that's why I've got G and H. But I'm going to look here under my E drive and make sure I've got a good within a month's backup, which we've got. Every site should be backing up every month. This is on every desktop side, I would say. And then you just drill into the actual Windows backup. And this one looks like it doesn't have a full backup. So it would normally have Windows image backup there. It's not here. This is a lab. So I deleted it yesterday and was going to recreate it, but it didn't finish. So this is a red flag. Obviously, in this case, you would go back into Control Panel and go under here in a backup and restore. And manage space, we can see what shows here, but it's obviously not got a full backup. It's got a few things, but it's missing the image backup. So we should make sure the schedule is turned on. Second. And let's go to change settings and make sure this is correct. E is where I always go on the backup on these desktop servers. Go next. Let me choose always. I know this has changed over the past, but I recommend go ahead and just check off these. The reason why is you can actually go in and find files and restore individual files. This is not creating a larger backup. This is just allowing you to go in and drill in and get those files that you may need that were for, within the last month when it's backed up. If you don't check that, the only thing you can do is restore the whole image. And that is definitely, is got to have that, of course, but this check here is doing the full image backup. So if this is checked off, you're good. If you just do it individuals, that's not a good thing. Always check this, always have C and D. There are some rare exceptions to this, but this is our typical site. Server sites, if they're running Windows Server 2012, 2016, or even old sites 2008, those need to have an external backup of some sort. They're probably running a RAID 5, and there's no good way of backing up a RAID 5 within itself. It needs to have an external backup, and those typically run on a daily basis. And that's the way we have to back those up. Those are the exceptions, so I'm not going to get too much into that, but external backup on sites that are that way, because obviously a RAID 5, it's got a good hardware recovery. So if a drive dies, you got 3 drives or more, you just replace the drive, you're good. But if we got a Windows screen, blue screen of death, that's a absolute nightmare. So if we have a restore point on an external, that saves us. The same way as it saves us on this RAID 1, the reason we do the backups to the third partition is because of RAID 1, if the drives are healthy, I've never seen a site, except for never seen a site actually crash 2 drives at the same time. A lightning strike can happen. I think there's been some rare cases where a drive dies and nobody detects that, and then we end up having, we have to have a situation where we go to another site and restore an image, and it's just a big mess. So Vigilex should pick up bad drives, and most time that happens. If you ever see, obviously, a drive that's failed, you definitely want to fix that, replace the drive, get that working. So next here, we are set to back up every day on the 6 a.m. That's fine, as long as it's not interfering with anything. Obviously, Windows backup will run in the background and not interrupt anything. It may just slow some things down. So that looks good. I'm not going to back up this right now. Just will slow down the PC. So I'll just leave that alone. But obviously, saw this in the field, I would back it up. Sorry, right now, so they have a backup. So that's checking that. The other thing is here, I've got a drive error, and I went ahead and had just one drive on this computer, and I plugged in a secondary drive. If I go in here, we can do all this. This is a Flex PC, but this should work in most 57, 58, 5810s. You can do a manage and then add the secondary drive that you just replaced without going to Control-I when you're booting up. I've noticed on Flex, it seems like there's less options there. So this is a preferred way of doing it. Plus, you can just have somebody plug in a drive and do it in Windows, utility, and not have to shut it down for very long. So this is the preferred way. There are some situations where this doesn't work on very old computers, maybe 57, 5800, when you have a different size drive. So obviously, it's pretty common that somebody, if we had a way out somewhere and we needed to go buy a drive, we can't find a 500 gig drive, which is typical what we have, and somebody goes to Best Buy and gets a 1 terabyte, 2 terabyte drive. That's fine, but sometimes it doesn't. It gives an error on some of these Intel things. Now it will work in Control-I, so you can do a Control-I and get that to mirror down. Of course, it's going to shrink it down to the smaller drive size, which is perfectly fine. But as long as it's the same size drive, this works pretty much every time. I'm going to fix this problem here. Rebuild to another disk. So you just go in here, go to Manage, Rebuild to another disk. So looking at this, it's going to say build here. You can't. I always read this to make sure I'm doing the right thing, but I don't believe you get as a way of blowing this up, because basically I've got a blank drive. The only time you could have an issue here is you put a drive in there that wasn't blank, or I know recently Brady had an issue where GPT partition was put on the drive. I think that may have happened on some other occasions. You can blow out that GPT partition in Computer Administrator Disk Management. So you've got to fix that before you can run this. And normally what I would do is fix that, make it a standard drive, blow out the partition, and then you're good to go. But the main thing is you want to have, if it's a sealed drive, obviously that's fine, but make sure we have, before drives go on the shelf, that we blow them out. When I have a third-party tech, I'd never want to have anything on that drive, because if it had an image on there or something else and we end up booting off of it and it started syncing, that would be obviously a nightmare. So rebuild here, kicks that off. And it shows this other drive until it gets done. That's fine. Everybody's, I guess, somewhat familiar with this. I just want to go through the steps there and also warn about that GPT partition. That's got to be fixed. I would say if we've got any question about ones on the shelf that have been pulled out of an old or maybe a new computer, that obviously we got a lot of drives, spin drives that were pulled from new PCs to put in SSD drives. Let's make sure if there's any question that those are blown out. Brady, you had a, did you have any other drives that way? I know you had that one, that Dario.
Actually, all of the drives that we have from any of the new PCs that we've changed over to SSD, they're all GPT. I'm going through 5 of them at a time, just so I have 5 that are wiped.
Okay.
Completely. But every one of them is GPT.
Are you not able to blow that out with a drive cloner?
What I've done is I've taken one drive and pretty much wiped it clean, and then pretty much used the other ones on the cloner, and that seems to be doing it.
You're saying you blowed it, you just wiped it clean through the cloner or through?
No. I wiped it clean through the way you and I did it.
Okay.
Going through disk management, and I did one disk that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if that cloner's not blowing that out. It should be, but maybe it doesn't. So anyway,
I'm going to test those later today on my lab.
Okay, because I liked using the cloner because it's just a simple, quick way to do it. But yeah, let me know on that.
Yeah, I tried erasing all the 3 different choices you have for erasing it, and it still doesn't do anything to it.
Yep. Okay. All right, that's building the background there. So the next thing I wanted to just look at is mini partition tool. Y'all use that. There's common thing, we're running out of space, like I mentioned before. If we go into here, this is a typical site. It's got a 100 gig space. That we don't run into too many situations where that runs out of space. There does at times. I've noticed some Shift4 sites have some logs that build up. They take a ton of space. I don't know why that's happening. I think it may be on certain sites. So there can be something that really jumps out that you can clean up. But especially if this one had less than 10% left and it was a 100 gig partition, that would tell me something's wrong. So I'd try to find where that issue is and not just try to repartition this. Of course, you can run, the obvious thing to run is just do disk cleanup. That's Windows default program there. Run that, make sure things are cleared up when it comes to recycle bin and other things that are just taking up space that can be easily cleaned up. I would run that. This is running a little sluggish because it's got the drive cloning or mirroring there, but run that on C, run that on D. Now, actually, D is not really a problem. D is almost always full, got plenty of space on it. If for some reason D runs out of space, there's somebody just dropped a bunch of files there. Want to make E obviously the largest to try to keep as much backups as we can. My goal is always at least have 1 month's backup, if not more. But it's obviously been a problem in the past where we try to keep too many backups, and last known backup is a lot of times the setting we have it set to, because I want to make sure the last image is still there from the first of the month. It runs out of space and you end up having a situation that's 6 months old. There's not a good way of monitoring that right now. So let me cancel this. Everybody's, I'm sure, familiar with disk cleanup. Just run that utility, free up some space, and should be good there. All right, let me run this load mini partition tool for those not familiar or haven't read it. I know we've talked about it in the past, but let's run this real quick. This is something that we run into, especially with these sites that have 60 gig partition on the drive C, and we've got to expand that out, shrink drive D, increase drive C. And that, if we got a very old site that's got 250 hard drives, there's not an easy, quick way of just dropping to 500 drives because that RAID's built that way. That site, typically, if it's 250 drives, they probably need an upgrade. So I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time there. If we need to fix that, it just in a situation, shrink drive D, increase drive C, even in those situations, and that will at least fix the problem for that point. I wouldn't even try to do a larger drive. They need to upgrade to a new PC, I'm sure. It's a pretty thin program. I always load this on drive C, even if it's running low in space. Doesn't really matter. In the end, always uninstall this, never leave it on a site. If somebody starts playing around with this, it can blow it up for sure. So, and the two things I use is going to be the partition manager, but also the disk space analyzer. It's a neat little basic tool that lets you look for stuff that's taking up a lot of space. So you go over here, and typically, of course, like I said, drive C is our issue. Scan that. Let that run through. And then, because obviously there's ways of looking for large files, and there's things we always look for, but this, you could sort it in a descending order by folders and by files, and you'll see things that jump out. Really, on the folder could have a lot of, maybe you've got 10% of your disk is filled up by a bunch of little log files. That can happen. You see that in the folder view. And then, of course, you got giant files that show up in the file view. So it's good to look at that. And there's just not a good view to Windows to get that. So this is why I like running this real quick. And maybe we don't need to repartition. So file view here, descending order. We got the page file. We can't really mess with that. I've looked at this already on this one. There's nothing really standing out. This is in a healthy situation. But I'm looking here for things that jump out that are just not needed. If in doubt, you never blow it out for sure. Folder view, let's look there. Windows, that's taking up most of all that, of course. This right here can always be cleared out. This is 3.15 gig. And this is what I find at a lot of sites. And so even if you're not running this utility, this is just drivers for the computer that you're on, the HP drivers. This would save us over 3 gig to get rid of this. You can blow this out; it won't hurt a thing, because basically this is just sitting there as when you load those drivers, it just drops them in this folder. Then you run it, and then it installs into Windows. So this is not anything vital. It's handy to have, of course, reload drivers, but it's no big deal just to go to the HP site and download them again, and we typically are not doing that very often. So just if you're running out of space and you have nowhere to go, and you really could get to a good spot by just getting rid of something else, get rid of this SW setup, just blow it out. Of course, I could just do it here. And it's gone. You could do it through this utility as well, so either way. Just want to show a few things there. Just this site, this lab is in great shape, but there's actually a site I'll show you right here. This is the Aubrey's in Cleveland that Paul's going to run tomorrow with they need a new UPS, but while he's there, we need to repartition. They're running low on space. I'll show you what's going on there. Right there, they're running under 10%, and that's on a small 60 gig partition. So, and the help desk gets in there and they look at it, you know, and they clean up a few files. I did notice though, they've got that same folder there. This one's not as large. I went and get rid of it, but it's not saving as much space. We need to reallocate this one. So that never gets done unless we're on site. The way to do that is to, let me get out of this side. I don't need to do anything else. I just want to show, I did load that partition tool for tomorrow. And we'll run that. Log off. I really don't want to leave it there overnight, but it's probably fine. So I would not leave that on there long term though, for sure. Just don't want somebody playing around with it on the slab. Of course, no big deal. So I know Candace, you and some others have done this on site. We had a issue. Actually, I was working with Paul. So the way to do this, of course, you take the secondary drive. You're there before hours, obviously. You unplug the secondary drive after you shut down, and you're running on the primary. And this is after you, of course, know you're synced up. Once you do that, then, of course, if this thing blows up, and it's happened only once, and I don't remember exactly why, then you're fine. You can just boot off the secondary. You haven't lost anything, no big deal. You do that 20 minutes before they open, and you're fine. But if for some reason it gets some error and blows up, then you know you can't have any way of restoring. That's why we don't run this remotely. It'd be nice to do that. So there was an odd situation though when Paul did this. Well, I was working with Paul running this utility, and when I basically increased the size of D after shrinking drives, increased the size of C after shrinking drive D. When it did that, it was running through, and actually sometimes it reboots. In this case, it didn't. And at the very end of it, it actually said, "Do you want to format this drive D?" And I said, "No." And I shut it down. I was concerned though, because I thought if somebody would have chose yes there, because it was like it didn't recognize it, because Windows 7, it didn't know what to do with it. Rebooted, it was perfectly fine. But that's just an example of how things could go wrong in that situation. So in this case, if I go, let's say resize, and you can do, let's go to drives. See, let's just go drive D. Let's resize this one. And you can do this different ways. I use a slider. So if we go say around 2 gig, something small. Drive C. Got a little bit of room there. Drive that out. And then nothing happens until you apply this. And if this thing blows up, no big deal. It's just my lab. But I would not do this in any other situation. And I think it may be able to handle this. This is Windows 10. I think it probably most of the time will not have to shut down, but sometimes depending on where the data is on drive C, it may have to do that. I'm hoping it doesn't in this case. I just want to show this. We'll let this run through real quick, and then I'll catch a few other things. The other things I want to talk about is just dealing with sites that have, say, the database doesn't start or other issues with the server. Any questions so far? Just checking out the basic things with drive partitions and Intel utility. Take that as a no. So, all right. And the other thing is about recovery needs. You know, I mentioned this before, but basically, I don't keep every type of computer we have out there. If somebody's got a very old, I'm thinking like a 58 or something before 5700. I'm not worried about those sites because they shouldn't be under contract, or there may be a few here and there, but if they crash, we want to use a 5700, 5800. They definitely don't have, I mean, I don't think we have any XP sites under any maintenance, but if I miss one, then we could use a 5800 running XP. So I want 5800s, 5810s, flexes, anything 5700. If we have one around, I think we had a situation recently where somebody needed to, yeah, Terry, you shipped that drive to Parity site, and we had a 5700 there that was good, and it was an exact replacement. So I'm like, let's just use it. But if we didn't have it, wouldn't have been a big deal. We'd just use a 5800 and move on. So I'm not going to buy any more 5700s for sure. 57, 58, 5810, those are all run on all compatible with each other. Windows 10 will run on 5810 and Flex. It technically will run on 5800, but I wouldn't use that. So we're not going to put in a 5800 in place of a Flex, for instance. But if we have a 5810 that goes out and all we have is a Flex, we can put that in, it'll work just fine. And vice versa in that case. Windows 10. We don't have any Windows 10 in hospitality running. In any hospitality, we have some in retail they upgraded. So the only situation you have there is the network driver a lot of times doesn't work on Windows 7. It probably does in Windows 10 because it discovers that with no issue, because Windows 10 is obviously much more current. But you run into more issues sometimes with video drivers, network drivers on Windows 7. When you're using, say they had a 57, you put a 58 or 5810 over a 5800. So you run into that. So that's done. It looks like all that went just fine. Just a small example of what to do. So the next thing is, having things you need, having the server you need. If your site crashes, it doesn't boot, take a 5800, 5810 Flex, whatever you need. If it's dead, if it's blue screen of death, of course, always have your drives, the ring of drives, the boot, Windows 7, Windows 10 repair. Those are essential. The Samsung 500 gig, have that with you. That not as critical for just that basic stuff, but always have that just together. The partition utility, of course, is on that, which is along with being on tech files on the cloud. The other thing is about just sites that sometimes you don't deal with this, help desk does, but I've helped with situations. The help desk had a site that was crashed, and things like services don't show up or whatever. There's just situations, if you know how to resolve it or know how the system works, it's definitely useful, because it's just an absolute nightmare when a site is going half the day and they have a crash and the database doesn't start. Well, you could, of course, restore the database from the day before, but they've lost all the transactions. Main thing is credit cards, outside of just balancing nightmare. So if we can resolve that situation with a current database, I'm not quick to just throw in the old database. If you have to, because the database is corrupt, that's fine. But there's so many other reasons why that does happen. One of the reasons it's happened before, and this was overlooked by me and others, is if I had a site that was running out of drive C, it was maxed out, and nobody looked at this because they were just looking at the database not starting. And I'm like, I dropped in the database from the day before and it didn't work. And it was just a weird situation where I just didn't look at the obvious, and the drive C was out of space and it was blowing up and it couldn't start the database because I think the swap file was probably choking and everything else. So but a lot of times in that case, the Windows will blow up. In this case, it didn't. So that's why I look at those essential things like drive space first, make sure that's clean. Getting an event viewer, see if something is just really messed up there. If you've got something weird going on where a system's locking up, look in there for things. 9 times out of 10, you don't see anything in event viewer. You see a bunch of clutter of stuff, but it's always good to look. I have seen drive errors in that. If that ever shows itself, if you ever see a smart error popping up on a boot up, you definitely want to fix that right away. That's one of your drives is giving that, that's an acronym for a drive performance error. And that's just a blessing in the sense that you know ahead of time. Most of the time the drive dies before you ever see that error. So that came out many years ago, but smart errors, find the bad drive, replace it. If in doubt, always replace the drive. if we've seen issues where the system just runs like a dog. This happened at a place in Louisville, Kentucky a few years ago. And I mean, it's just like the system was very slow. I mean, it wasn't getting any drive errors. It just was running at about, a 2% speed. I mean, it would literally take the database 10 minutes to start, and then it would run for 2 minutes and die. And then it'd kick it off again, and it would fail. And it was just a weird, like, we thought it was software. Same thing happened at Dario recently where weird things were going on. It really was just one of the drives was failing. So, but the problem was we spent so much time trying to troubleshoot it that if we'd have known that ahead of time and looked for that ahead of time, we would have saved ourselves and the customer some trouble as far as, let's just go out there and run the call. So, the other thing that I've seen happen is if the database is failing, it could be because services are missing. So if you go into services, and this is an easy fix. I know that Help Desk has called me about this before. I've had a site that I recovered that had the same issue. And this is a very easy fix. Some people go to the extreme of restoring the whole system. If it literally is just the database service or just the services are missing, and the essential services that you have are 3700D, that one there. Go down. This other one, the database service right there. That one's down low. It's not up there with the microservices. I don't know why. I must have shut this off earlier. Now, a lot of times when you get a services error, you'll see, and this is, it may automatically kick this off, but you'll see things popping up here. I forget what they are, but you'll see things popping up where it's not just the database is starting and then failing. It'll say, it may even say 3700D is missing or something or not started. So some things like that. That was what's jumping out of the site, and it has been in other situations. Dario they had hard drive failures, and it was actually dying and blowing things up before, as soon as we fixed it, it just blew itself up again. So, but all you have to do to fix this is you go to another site. Say 3700D is just missing from here. Scroll down. So if it's just not there, the 3700D, the auto sequence backup servers, caller ID that's not an essential service, but if it's missing, something's wrong with that. But I'm looking for these. This will cause the database not to start. Some of these other ones that are not as OCB server, that needs to be there. But there's other ones like let's see, liquor dispensing system here. That's probably not essential, but there is probably close to 20 services here that should all be there. On older systems, there were less, but most of all our systems are running 5 something, so they're all about roughly around 20 services. But missing that 3700D, easy fix for that is so this didn't start. Probably because that service is not running. I can go to another site and go to, say, regedit. And this doesn't matter. Any site that's running 5.0 and higher, all this should be in line. Even a Windows 7 should be, I would prefer, I guess, shouldn't be a problem, but I would probably stick with go to Windows 7 site or Windows 7 issue, like say another site. It doesn't have to be like if it's an Aubrey's, it doesn't have to be another Aubrey's. It could be if it's J. Christopher's, it could be any site, just Windows 7, Windows 7, Windows 10, Windows 10. I'd stick with that because some of the structure in the registry may be a little different just to be safe. But right there, scroll up a little bit here. Local machine, system, current control set. These are backup sets, but if you get the current control set under services, and some of these are kind of hidden around, but you got to dig around to find them. 3700D is, some of these are real obvious, but some of them are not labeled the same as they are. So you have to search around. You'll find them sometimes in some of these other ones, But look for the services you're missing. I'm just going to use 3700D as an example. Right click, export it. And I already did this one anyway, this example, but that's right there. I exported that little key. And you technically could manually key this in, but why go through that trouble? It's a lot of work. Go to the site, export it, bring that little small file over, import it in. That saved a site that was down for, I don't know, probably most of the day, or at least through lunch. And the help desk didn't know what to do with it. Like, we got to go out there and recover the site. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. Would have been a lot more hassle. And at the time, this was probably before we had I don't know if they had a full backup. And there's always, if you don't have a current recent backup, you don't want to get in that mess where you're finding a site that's similar. In this case, it was an Aubrey's. It was a Barley site. Basically, it was owned by Aubrey's, but it is similar to some of the other locations. But the thing is every site is a little bit different. Maybe it's a different gift card, different patch version. It's got to be the exact same. If you're cloning a site, bring it to another, and if there's anything different, then you've got a mess. Especially if you have a site that's running, if they're doing offline transactions, you don't want that to ever change the version. You have to keep that exactly the same. If you get to a site that has too high of a version, say they're on 5.5 and you had you took it to a site that had a 5.2 version, well, you can't fix that easily. You can fix that by trying to restore 5.0 and things like that, but you're going to spend a whole lot of time doing that. So if they wasn't doing offline transactions and you had a slightly lower site, say you had a 5.2 and it was a lower patch than, say, the site you're at, and they wasn't doing offline, you could patch it up, and that's not a big deal. But if they're doing offline transactions, you don't want any of that to change. If you do that, they may lose all those transactions, which probably have credit card files stored on them. The thing about that is, if you go into the micros folder if it's a compact flash, or if it's a Win32, like a Win 610 workstation or whatever, just grab the micros folder on every one of those workstations. And worst case, we've got enough to rebuild that to restore it on a lab and get their credit card transactions. We've done that successfully. We had a nightmare at one site that didn't work because they were using a specific thing. It had to do with a place called Painted Duck, and that was a mess, but that was a one-off and it had to do with a specific thing they were doing with tips, and it's probably never going to happen again. So, but we did get that information, and it couldn't upload. So if we get that, at the very least, before you connect up workstations, grab that, especially if they've been going, if they got a bunch of transactions out there. It does work really well, and most of the time it works fine, but I don't like when somebody's real gung-ho, oh, just run standalone. It's like, definitely you could do that, but when there's always a risk involved. If they're not doing any kind of, imprints or anything else, which are getting more difficult, obviously, with credit cards not having raised numbers. So that becomes more of a challenge, and it's hard to do that. They don't want to do that either. So anyway, the whole idea is we find the quickest way to restore them so they don't stay in standalone very long, if they are at all. And if you tell somebody they can run standalone, just be sure to tell them that there's a risk involved. You could lose all your credit card information. I just don't want to be the one that does something that ends up blowing that up. So give them fair warning, and then let's do what we need to do and save the information off the workstation before connecting. And most of the time you won't have any issue. Keep the same version, you're good to go. And really the most likely situation where Windows blue screen of death, we fix that issue by restoring. That's a 30-minute process. Typically, we're grabbing the database off of, basically what I would say is just grab the whole micros folder. If you pull a drive in that blue screen of death situation and you can read that drive, that's fine too. You don't have to actually, move that to another drive. That's fine. Just make sure you have the information of the micros folder off of that drive before you do a restore, because obviously if we restored a site today that was on June 1st, then we would just put them right back to June 1st, and then we'd be vulnerable to saying, let's get the backup from the cloud. The main thing is having that database. So with that being said, let's look at, get out of here. Some of you may know this, but I'll cover it anyway. So they'll have, what I normally do is under services, I will shut all these down. And when you shut down services, if you're doing a patch or doing anything else, if you ever end up doing a patch, this is what I would recommend doing. Go to all of your services, starting with Vigilex. Shut Vigilex off first. If you're ever running a patch, you have to shut down Vigilex. The reason why is it will kick things back on in Micros proactively. And you could be running a patch, and this has happened many times, where you blow up the patch and you blow up the database, you blow up everything, because Vigilex is clicking that thing off when the patch is like shutting the services down while it's doing what it needs to do, then turns them back on. So it interferes and causes a mess there. So let me, and you know, sure everybody's familiar with these services. A lot of times they'll kick back on, and you just gotta, there's been some scripts, VB scripts set to shut these down, but I don't have one, and I just normally just shut them down manually like this. And when they kick back on, just shut them back off. They will stay down once you, normally the 3700D kicks back on, DB update sometimes comes back on here. And then you'll notice this one here, that's off. And I'm shutting all this. So if I'm trying to rebuild, which is a common thing you'll do too, is say a database is too large or it needs to be rebuilt. Help Desk does this a lot. The most safe way to do that is back up your database, back up the live database, because when you rebuild, you don't need to have the encryption. All the encryption is in the registry. So it's not a bad practice to back up the entire registry, which can be easily done. Let's see. Through, hang on, regedit. Oops. Some sites we have the full registry backed up, but regedit. Right. You want to back up the entire registry. I can do that real quick like that. If a patch is being done, backing up the registry is definitely a good practice to do. It takes seconds, really. No, I'll let that go. But just want to show you can just go to the top item and just export the whole thing. So if you have a full backup, say you're running a patch, it's somebody in this, installers are typically running this, they're backing up. The best thing to do is back up the registry, like I just showed there, along with backing up the whole Micros folder. I shut down all those services. So I could copy this entire folder. Oops, wrong button there. I could copy this all over here to wherever you want to put it. And Micros backup, what do you want to call it? And then if that blows up, if you restore that registry and restore that whole Micros folder, because things when the patch hits, it's going to update different files. That most time will resolve the issue. That's if you're running a patch. If I was doing that remotely, the only issue you run into is cal kicks off, and sometimes when that blows all the way up, they may have to recal. But I wanted to just show that is if you're trying to run a patch. I would always back up the registry and back up the Micros folder, and that will 9 times out of 10 probably save you, and maybe you have to run cal. We have sites that are a couple hours away because our only other option is somebody gets in a car, drives out there, and restores the image. Obviously, before you kicked off a patch, I would do like I said, the backup of both those, the registry and the Micros folder. But on top of that, you make sure you have a recent backup of the system on Drive E. If you got that, then you're safe to do it. We're not going to be running patches that often, but if I'm doing a rebuild, I'm going to go into find the live database, which is always the same path. Micros database data. It's always this DB micros and micros.log. So I could take these two files. This is what I do. Is if I'm going to rebuild a site and maybe I'm going to crunch down the numbers and try to get smaller database, I'm going to copy these two files somewhere else. The reason I do this is sometimes when the rebuild, if you're doing a rebuild and it blows up, it'll just throw everything up. I mean, it messes up everything. So if it blows up on just a basic rebuild in Database Manager, you can go run and just drop these two files back in there. You don't have to do a DM-U, which is a Database Manager update, which is how you would pull in a MBZ file, a backup validated file from before. This is a faster way of doing it and an easier way of doing it. The only thing is you got to shut down all the services to get access to it. So I did this at Dario recently because they had a huge database, and I had an error one time doing a DM-U, and it's and rebuilds rarely fail, but when they do, then it just leaves it in a vulnerable state. I copied these two files back in, it was good to go. So and the thing about some people think you need to have the micros MBZ, and you do need to have that if you're moving from another site. But if nobody has changed the encryption keys, none of that changes. The registry is the exact same. That rarely changes, even over several years. I wouldn't just assume that, but I know that when I'm working on it myself, that this system is running. I grab the live database. I don't need the MBZ file because I don't need the registry key. And then under backup, this is where you should always have several backups, the minimum two. So you've got these two here. And all this is two files zipped up. It's just renamed. So I were to rename this, say, zip. I'm going to say that, and then I can just look at this. And this is all it is. When you see a MBZ, and depending on the version, you'll see a G4, G3, G2, all that. Sometimes just MBZ 5. That's sometimes, depending on the version. So you'll see that difference. But this is just a zipped up file. It's nothing, not much to it. That is the actual key there that injects in the registry that matches the database. So you have to have that when you're moving a database from one site to another, because it's got to update the registry first and then restore the database. So that's why that's there. But that there's not much, you just see that's just a database file. It's nothing to that. Now, the other thing is, if you need to, the easiest way to restore a database is just say you need to restore a database from the day before because it was corrupted or whatever. Just go into, take one of these MBZ files. I'll rename this back to what it was, because I had to make it a .zip so I go look at that way. Change it back to what it was before, because that's what it needs to see it as. I take, if I want to put this 6/9/2021, I want to restore to that. Copy that. And what I do is I put it right in the root of D. And the reason I do this is this makes it easier. So I'm going to paste that over here. Now I'm going to try to restore this. If for some reason it fails, it's no big deal. I can just drop in the one that I had before, that micros DB micros log. You got to have those two. If you're just going to drop it back in there, you have to have both together. But when you're doing what's called a DM-U, and DM Database Manager is a command level one you do, is DM space -U. The -U is an upgrade command. So if you have a situation where you're dropping a database that's a lower version, it's going to know to get done restoring that and then update to that site's level. So it will do that update at the very end of it. In this case, it doesn't need to because I'm at the same version. So I'm going to take this file and I'm going to make the name much smaller. I'm just going to call it m.mbz5g4. The reason I'm going to do that is I'm going to bring this, and let me bring the services back up. Tedious, just click at each one, but obviously reboot does the same, it would do it all for you. I've had some weird situations where for some reason it was just not liking, I think some site that somebody was at, I think Candace was at a site that had an issue. I think it had to do with the Shift4, and it had to do with the services not running or not running in the right, something was off. So I'd like just reboot it and it fixed it, of course. And sometimes certain services are best, started in a certain order, but this normally works just fine. Almost there here. Run control really wasn't matter. That manually starts when it's initiated. Those won't matter, and skip that. See if SQL started by itself. It may have. No, it's fine. You should be able to restore. Let's start. Make sure the database starts here. I believe it will. I just want to make sure we're still in a good state, and then we'll do a restore off this other one. It's running a little sluggish because it's still syncing up here. $60. That's getting there. The other thing you run into is this right here. That's the computer name, set name. I won't get into that today, but you'll have to change that on if you move a database from another site. If we had to do recovery that way, we don't run into that. I'm trying to avoid that most of the time because that obviously is something that we don't have to do unless it's a last resort. These backups being on the site, I'm trying to keep things to make it simple and have a quick way of recovery. We've had many times in the past where we were scrambling, going to another sister property, grabbing their drive, and then you find out, oh, they use a different credit card driver, they use a different gift card. It turns into a weak project, it seems like. So backups are critical to keep that from happening. So I'm going to take this and normally I set this to off. Now, if this doesn't work, then sometimes you got to kick off the, put it in database mode, but I'm going to put it in off mode for right now. And then I'll go into database manager and I'll show you where you do a rebuild. And I won't kick off the rebuild because it's no reason to do that here, but I'll show you where you run that. And then we already did the precaution to grab the Micros DB, Micros log, set it aside. If we run this rebuild and it blew up on us, no big deal. We're up and going in about 5 minutes. So I'm just going to go to the graphical DM manager here. You can run this command line or the graphical. If it gives an error here, it's no big deal. Just go to put it in database mode in the control panel. But most time this does work on the newer versions. It kicks off what's needed to just run database manager. So you shut the database off, run DM, bring this up, and never re-encrypt. Of course, you're used to doing this active discovery mode. There's no reason to re-encrypt that I know of. outside of maybe going from a very old version to a newer version, but I won't get into that. To rebuild, just click on that and run. But I'm not going to run this, but it does give this error, or not error. It just says it'll say it could take several. It'll say stopping the system. It also warns you that it could take hours to run. I've never seen one take that long. It could take 30 minutes. Normally it's about probably 10, 15. It could take longer. You have to set some cushion time for that. Normally the help desk does this late at night after they're closed. If for whatever reason you were trying to do a rebuild and it was 10 in the morning and they had to open 11 and it was taking over 30 minutes and you had to kill it, you could kill it. In this situation, drop in the Micros DB, Micros log, and you're back up and going. And that's, that's why we did that precaution. So I'm not running that. I just want to show you where that's a simple, very simple to run a rebuild, not much to it, but there sometimes does fail. And when it does, we got a quick fix to get out of it and restore where we're up and going in a matter of, even with services, we're probably talking 5 minutes. So it's a nice, you have to stir and sweat it out. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and set this to, we're still on off, I believe. Yep. So now I'll say in this situation, we've got a bad database. I got to restore. What I do there is go to command level, is CMD, just a basic CMD command. Go to drive D. And then I'm going to do a directory just to see what I was looking at there. Then on that, I'm going to run DM database manager space -u. If that case says it doesn't matter about that. What does matter is if I don't put the actual direct path, which I've done this many times, where if I go and don't put the actual direct path D:\\, you have to put the D:\\. You had to put the direct path. I put this as the root of drive D, so I wouldn't have to put a long string of directories here. So I also named it M, so I wouldn't have this long, character, all these characters for the database. MBZ. One thing you can't change is you have to leave the extension the same, which is somewhat long, but that's required. So it's going to do a update of this actual database from 6.9. You run that and immediately you should get database manager popping up here. If for some reason you put in the file name and didn't put D:\, you would say file not found. If you see file not found, that's because you forgot to put D:\. You have to have the direct path, drop it in drive D, root, and that way you don't have to, you technically put it in C, but why would you do that? Just put it in drive D at the root and make it easier on yourself. So it does a restoring backup. It'll restore the keys as part of it because it doesn't know that it is the same, that it doesn't need to do that. So it does that process again. The keys wouldn't have changed in this case because, I know what was going on here because it's the same database that was backed up yesterday. If I didn't know, then I guess there would be some question there, but this normally is pretty quick. The reason it is because in this computer's running a little slow because it's still syncing those drives, but this is probably a 5-minute process on a standard database at the most because nothing's updating, because it's going to get to the end and say it doesn't need to update because it's the same version. If you were updating it and you're trying to upgrade a site, it's the same command you run. So an installer typically, if they're upgrading a site from say 5.2 with a new computer and say it's 5.7, they're grabbing the latest database that they have and they're doing the same command. They're going from 5.2 to 5.7 and it updates that database. That way they don't lose any totals and everything else. It's really pretty quick. That ran through pretty quick there. So there's that file. So the true test, of course, is starting the database, make sure it actually runs. There's a log file too to see if it come back with an error, but that typically what happens, it runs through and then that DM goes away. Database manager screen goes away. And we should be green checked here. The other thing I wanted to mention is go to this is not starting. Always look at your log manager, 3700D. And I'll show one other thing here that's helpful that on a log. Let's wait till this gets done. I'll show you this one last thing. So the 3700D file, that gets rotated every day. It's part of the end of the day process. So you can see the entire day's worth of logging. There's a lot of chat in that log file. What I like to do a lot of times is if I wanted to just not to stare at a bunch of lines on a log file, I'll just do a quick rotate here. That'll rotate the log and clean it up so there's nothing in the log file. So when you're starting the database, it doesn't you have to dig through as much. So I'll do a reload right there, 3700D. And if the database is failing, a lot of times you can tell what's going on here. I've seen situations where the 3700, like the issue was MDS host missing, and that brings up one other thing is the database will not load if MDS host file is missing, and I've seen that fail when you're restoring a site too. MDS host file just disappears. Don't know why that happens, but I have seen it happen before, and you'll start seeing there's no nodes at MDS host. I wouldn't worry about trying to back up that on a typical situation, but if you have no nodes at MDS host, you may have to grab a MDS host file from somewhere else to fix this. I've had to do this before. MDS host file has to be there. If it's not, it will not start the database, and you will see that in this log viewer. It will say no nodes at MDS host, and that is built off the native host file of Windows. But if it's gone, it's gone, and it just doesn't recreate itself for some reason. I don't know. And it happens when you're doing rebuilds and some other things. It has occurred. So Micros common etc is always the path for MDS host. Right there. You can view this file, but never change it. Just, if you wanted to see what was in it, that's fine. Obviously, we run into this slide. I won't get, we'll wrap this up here in a minute, and we'll go over some more details on a future training. But if you want to make sure that the MDS host was correct, because when you're running cal, this pulling from this, if for some reason this is wrong, it's because it hasn't updated. And obviously, the way that you can tell is looking at the actual timestamp. Sometimes you'll see it's like a couple of months old or whatever. That means it's not updating. If you're ever messing with MDS hosts and you want to try something, I do this all the time. This has to do with just, you don't ever need to delete anything. Just copy and make a copy of it, rename it, whatever. I made a copy of it just right there. But under the configurator, so if I'm messing with the MDS host, I'm going to look at the host file, the actual host file too, make sure it's correct. You can have duplicates in host, and you want to fix that before you really do much with MDS host. So just make sure your host file is fine. And of course, it has a little quick button here that's supposed to update the actual host file. And if you go, let's go under Windows, System 32 drivers, that's always your path for the native host file. Windows 7, Windows 10, all of them are the same, never changed. So I could just delete this. That one actually will recreate this way. I just recreated it. Because sometimes I have seen where the host file is got extra stuff in it that could cause problems. Anyway, just want to bring that up. If you're messing with MDS host, definitely look at the host, the Micros or the Windows System 32 drivers, etc. Make sure that file is correct if your MDS host is not correct. And if you've got that error in 37D that database is not starting, it could be because your MDS host file is missing. and you can grab an MDS host file from another site, drop it in there, and then at least that would a lot of times jumpstart the database. Just wanted to touch on that real quickly there. So that is all I have for the day. I just wanted to go over the kind of the core things that I've dealt with res sites, and just making sure sites are healthy, knowing what to do when the database is not starting, looking for drive space, drive errors, resolving that, getting into the intel. I know most of you have done that sort of thing. Just wanted to kind of cover all that. Wanted to check to see who has questions about anything res foundation wise. Anything we covered? Is there any questions out there? Hopefully this was helpful for some of you out there. I will want to have some follow-up ones about, I renamed the meeting, server recovery essentials, because it's kind of all like over an hour time to kind of cover. But that is our main, concern, is trying to recover when something goes down. If we've got that foundation setting there, then we can get sites up and going. Glad to help in situations where we have a failure, but we've had a lot of success with that, doing the backups, going out there and proactively finding those. That saved our careers many times. There could be a situation where something's missed or whatever, but we'll deal with that as we need to. But I don't miss the days of going to another property and finding out that we're missing all kind of custom software. That's just an absolute nightmare. So I guess on the follow-up meeting, I wanted to have the next few weeks here, just have more about Calling workstations and some of the situations we run into there, trying to just be more efficient with when we run into situations and everything. Now, I know there's situations where things are just unique, whether it's Emory or some other property that's got a Freedom Pay or something else. But at least get the foundation about, when you're running into some problems with Cal or something else, why is it happening? Do they have two NICs on the server that can cause problems? And knowing, what Cal version should we use? If it's Symphony, Res is, I think, a little less confusing on Cal on most situations, but probably have maybe Mike help with some Symphony. We need to plan to get some, I plan to have some training done on that as well. So when it especially comes with our sites, I know we have some challenges with Marriott's because that's, really relying on Oracle on that. So, but if it's our own Symphony standard site, or say Symphony FE, then I want to be able to get in there and just run Cal. If we're replacing the same kind of workstation, it should be a quick process. And want to get some feedback from you about what you need help with as far as training after covering just kind of foundation thing. So anyway, that's all I got for the day, and I appreciate everybody getting on.
Hey, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right,
Thanks.
have a good one. See you later.